Hello everybody, welcome to Catherine Sews. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I want to talk to you about the importance of bias, what it means in terms of fashion, and why is it important. So if you're into sewing, you need to know how fabric is constructed. Now I'm just talking about woven fabrics for today. You probably already know that there's a lengthwise grain, which is called the warp. And then there's a crosswise grain, which is called the weft. So there are threads running up and down and across, and those threads hold the fabric pretty taut. And most fabrics, if they don't have lycra or spandex in them, they're not going to be able to stretch at all because those threads hold the fabric really tight. The angle that goes right between the lengthwise grain and the crosswise grain, that's called the bias. And there are obviously no threads running that way, so there's nothing holding the fabric taut on that angle. So that's where you get the maximum stretch out of a woven fabric and the maximum drape. And designers use that drape to create beautiful effects. The legendary fashion designer Madeleine Vionnet was the first to really popularize cutting on the bias. Her designs in the 1920s and 30s were spectacular in their use of bias to create beautiful body skimming, flowing designs. But we still use bias today for various purposes. So I want to show you a couple of things of why bias is important today. I've cut out two camisoles exactly the same size. They are the size small in the pattern that I use in my classroom. And the only difference between the two is that this one is cut on the bias and this one is cut on the straight of grain. So to really illustrate this, I'm going to take a pencil and drag it between two yarns of the fabric so that you can really see the grain line. And then I'm going to try putting both of them onto this dress form, and you're going to see a big difference. This is a very tightly woven muslin, but I think I'll still be able to do the little trick of dragging the pencil line right between two yarns. Right? I'm not using a ruler, you can see. It's just the pencil line just gets guided right between the two yarns of the fabric. So you can see that that is definitely cut on the bias. This one now is on the straight of grain. And again, I can just draw a perfectly straight line by just dragging my pencil right between those yarns in the fabric. So this one is clearly cut on the straight of grain. So now let's try to put these on the dress form. But first, I want to prove to you that they really are the same size. I cut them from the same pattern. So when I put the two bottom edges together, there's the one on the straight of grain, there's the one on the bias, and they really are exactly the same. Right? At the top edge as well, there's the bias, there's the straight of grain, and the two top edges are exactly the same. Now let's try to put them on the dress form. This is the one that I've cut on the straight of grain. Okay. And it's just not going to go. I'm going to tear a seam here if I keep struggling with this. It's just not going to get past the shoulders. Anytime you have a slim fitting garment that's cut on the straight of grain or cross grain, it's going to need some kind of opening to get onto the body, right? This needs a zipper or a button front or something, some kind of opening. It's just not going to go. I promise you, I just cannot get this on. It's stuck. Okay. Alrighty. So now let's try the one that is cut on the bias. That's quite a difference, right? Bias is kind of a miracle. So we've got yarns in the weave running this way, and they can just sort of mold over the body beautifully. It just skims the body. Bias is really a beautiful tool that fashion designers can use. There's one other way that I'd like to show you how we use bias. It's the way we use bias trim. Let me just show you what I mean. So this is a skinny strip of, I can't call it bias trim, it's just trim, I guess, because I just made it myself. I cut an inch wide strip off of this strip of fabric. You can see that this is on the lengthwise grain as the thread's running this direction. So this bit of trim would work just fine if I were just trimming the edge of something straight, like the top of a pocket, that would work just fine. It's beautiful. The moment that I get into a curve though, it is just going to buckle and be terrible. And it's going to resist that curve. The yarns in the fabric want to keep their structure and they don't want to go around that curve. So this is a package of store-bought bias binding. You can still make your own, but you would just cut it on the bias. And if I show you up close, hopefully you can see that the little yarns in the fabric are running straight across that way and this way. So that is bias. And this trim is going to go around a curve just beautifully. That's its main job, its main function in life. It's just going to immediately volunteer to go around that curve, right? And that is the difference that bias makes. Okay, everybody, I hope you learned something from that, and I hope that if bias was a mystery to you before, it makes a lot more sense now, and you understand why the structure of the fabric and the way we use that structure to our advantage can make such a massive difference in fashion design. Thank you so much for joining me today, and until next time on Catherine Sews, you take care.